your story is really interesting. A lot of times people think in the news that millennials are all about themselves. You don't care about anybody but you. Okay, and you don't care about money because you're straddled by crazy amounts of student debt, and you'd rather go, I don't know, hike on a mountain and pluck peaches. I don't know, but these are common misconceptions. So let's hear from you. You have a very special story, something that I'm really proud about. You are a millennial saver.
I am. I love saving. It sounds crazy or maybe even boring, but to me, saving is freedom. To be able to have money that you've accumulated and haven't spent on frivolous things that you won't remember the next day means that you can do the things that are really important to you, and you can take risks like starting your own business instead of working in a job that doesn't satisfy you, or you can take time off to go travel, or you can put it towards doing the things that really mean a lot to you.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, so you're 30 years old. Did you have college debt when you graduated school?
I was very lucky that I did not, for two reasons. My mom, first of all, who is where I learned all of my saving from, she was great at finding financial resources for college. So she applied us for every different sort of financial aid and scholarship. And then my grandmother helped us out with some of the tuition as well, and then worked through college. So I was able to graduate from a pretty expensive university debt-free. So that was very lucky.
And where did you graduate from?
From Duke.
Well, that's not too bad.
No.
And not a cheap university at that, and a very beautiful university.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Right? Well, that's an accomplishment. So let me ask you this. A lot of times young people will learn their saving habits from their parents. And that's kind of what you described. So it sounds like grandma was a good saver, mom was a great saver, and therefore does that make you the child of a good saver?
Definitely. I owe all of my financial abilities and my saving to my mom, for sure, and my grandmother as well. My mom taught me from a very young age to save. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, so she used that as a way to show us how to manage money. So we had an allowance from a very young age, and if we wanted a toy or if we wanted a candy, we had to save up our money to get it. So it just taught us the value of saving really early on, and that money didn't grow on trees. My grandmother, on the other hand, she was great about saving money and then using it for travel. She was a world traveler, loved to experience she's been to so many countries and speaks so many languages.
Wow.
And so her money was a way for her to do that for her savings.
So right now, let's have you. So what did your mom do? Did your mom work?
She did. When I was young, she was a waitress. She got all of her money in cash from tips. And she had this coffee can system. 4 coffee cans where 10% went to long-term savings, 10% to short-term savings, 10% to the church, and 70% for day in and day out expenses.
Well, she did budgeting before spreadsheets.
Exactly. But now she works at a university. She works in business operations at University of North Carolina at Greensboro.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So let's talk about you then. What do you do for a living now?
I run my own PR company.
So therefore, Little Penguin PR.
Right.
Right? And so unlike a lot of millennials who are straddled with tremendous debt, how are you different from the stereotypical millennial who just has debt?
Well, luckily I've not that I've never taken on debt, but I've never taken on what I guess most people would consider to be frivolous debt. Again, I got a really lucky start early on by being able to graduate debt-free. Just to be able to start with a clean slate was huge. I was also lucky, unlike the millennials that came after me, since I graduated in 2007, I graduated right before the recession really took hold. So I was able to get a job right out of college. And that was really lucky as well. So I was able to start my savings early without the debt and the unemployment sort of following me. But then I guess I continued from that point on living below my means instead of at or above, just to be able to save as much as possible.
Do you have an idea percentage-wise how much you save?
Yeah, I actually saved in my first 2 years out of college. I was working for Abercrombie & Fitch corporate headquarters in Columbus, Ohio, which is much cheaper than here in Southern California. So I was able to save half of my paycheck every month.
Wow, 50%.
Which is a lot.
That's incredible, considering you have to pay taxes and living expenses and everything else. And what would you say, now that you're in beautiful San Diego, California, percentage-wise, how much do you think you're able to save now?
Now it varies a lot, because I'm sure you know, when you're first starting out your own business, you never know exactly how much you're going to be making next month or the month after. So I would say I try to save even more, because you never know when you're going to have unforeseen expenses. You never know what's going to happen. You don't necessarily get a retirement plan from your employer, or health insurance taken care of, or even your taxes automatically taken out. So there's a lot more to think about. There's a lot more risk involved. So I try to save, I guess the easy answer is, as much as possible.
Okay, good. And so, we did this study called the Millennial Study, which you can find millennialstudy.com. And one thing that we found was people want to save, they just felt like they didn't even know where to start. Like you said, you were fortunate to graduate in 2007, so you got your first job. Did you, of the 50%, did you put any of it away for retirement? Did you invest any of it?
I did. I put, like my mom taught me, about 10% of the money I was bringing into a long-term savings. So thinking about retirements, and I'd always heard that, starting when you're young, starting when you're 22, it's just that many more years for it to build. And then as I was sort of transitioning out of the job there, I realized, we're in the middle of a recession. Stock market's pretty low right now. I've always heard, buy low, sell high. What a better time to buy stock than when all the industry experts are telling me that it's at sort of a generational low.
So how did you invest? Did you go to the bank? Did you do it yourself online? Did you find an advisor? Because what we found too, a lot of millennials prefer to do it themselves. Was that the case for you?
It was. I asked a lot of advice. I had a lot of my friends from Duke graduate into investment banking and big investment firms in New York. So I asked some of their advice, and they gave me, I think what most people would consider pretty sound advice, which is, look at a mutual fund that, or look at a sort of an index fund that follows the market. Look for something that doesn't have a lot of expenses associated with the investments. So I ended up going into an index fund.
Did you buy did you find it yourself and do it online yourself?
I did. So I just went to Vanguard and went through them and did some research on some stocks.
And you bought a fund?
And I bought a fund.
Good. And so did you put it into like an IRA to start with, or did you just invest it in a mutual fund?
So I have both. So I have a Roth IRA that sort of came over from Abercrombie, and when I left there and my tax was going to be really low. One year I transitioned it from a regular IRA to a Roth, and then everything else is in.
So proud of you for that.
Thank you. And then the rest of it's in a mutual fund, and that's what I'm hoping to, one day when I want to buy a house or another sort of investment, I'm going to be able to pull from that. So it's not specifically for completely set aside, don't touch it for retirement, but it is still a long-term savings.
Well, that's really interesting. And the fact that you own your own business, a lot of young people will say, well, I just want to get a job so I can work for someone to have stable income. Sure. But how did you make that leap from working at a company? I'm guessing, because you did work at a company and you had that stability, you were successful, to starting my own company. Because that seems for a lot of young people to be quite risky. And scary. How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to take care of myself? What made you decide to be able to do that?
Well, two things really. So the first one is I've never, as much as I love saving, I've never been worried about running out of money. One of the things my mom taught me is she said, before you leave the house, you're going to have to get waitressing experience. Because she was a career waitress for a long time, and she knew any city, any town in the whole world, no matter where you are, you can always support yourself waitressing. You can get a job the next day, start getting money. You'll never go hungry. You'll never not have a place to sleep as long as you have waitressing experience. So that gave me a little bit of a safety net that I knew, like, if something happened and I suddenly found myself my business failing and not knowing how I was going to make rent, I always had a backup.
Go back to hospitality.
Go back to hospitality. Luckily, I haven't had to do that, but it's another sort of security layer, just like savings is. The other way this transition sort of happened is after I left corporate America, I went on what was supposed to be a 6-month career break to Australia. And when I was there, I sort of realized that there was all these other places I wanted to go, because you're right there at New Zealand, Southeast Asia, South Pacific, all of these just places that come from a dream. I mean, they're wonderful and exotic and beautiful. And so I decided to not get on my flight home, not go back to the corporate job I had lined up for my return, and instead stay traveling. I ended up traveling for 3.5 years, full-time around the world. And along the way, I realized that I didn't think, your typical 9-to-5 was the right fit for me.
Okay, now that's a dream for so many people, to be able to travel abroad for 3+ years. How did you afford to do that?
Well, I had, while I was at Abercrombie, saving up my, 50% of my paycheck, I sort of thought that 2 years of saving half of my money would give me enough for 1 year of traveling. But what I found out is once you get rid of all of the little expenses that we have in our everyday life, from our cable bill to our cell phone bill, car insurance, rents, of course, once you get rid of all of that, there really isn't that much money there isn't that much to spend money on. I mean, flights are obviously going to be expensive, but once you're already all the way across the world.
But housing's expensive. Did you stay in hotel? Like, where did you live?
So if I was in a place for a month or longer, I'd get a little apartment. And generally the cost, at least in places like Australia and New Zealand, was comparable to what it'd be in the States. But I spent most of my time in Southeast Asia and the South Pacific.
Oh, which is less expensive.
Where you could get a nice hotel room for $5 a night. You could, eat and do transportation and everything else for about $5 a day. So my daily budget was only about $10 a day.
Wow, that's incredible. And so what did you do? I mean, I can't, I love vacation. I love this concept, I know, but for a lot of people, they're like, you're so used to being in the grind. What did you do when you traveled? It
was such a hard transition. At first, my first week I was in Australia, I would make these to-do lists with these ridiculous things on them just to check off. I would say, all right, eat lunch, put on my shoes, like these silly things, just because I didn't know how to live my life that wasn't, sort of dictated by
Were you by yourself?
I was.
Wow, what an amazing experience.
It was incredible.
So while you're doing this, did you write? Did you work? Did you do anything besides just enjoy?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, I realized sort of early on that I wanted to eventually start my own business. So I started reading everything I could on business, on entrepreneurship, on startups. I started looking up interesting people in whatever places I was and seeing if I could talk to them and hear about their story and how they got to where they are. I started writing. I started my first business just as sort of what I called an experiential MBA. I figured you could learn so much more just by starting a business, expecting it was going to fail, but just learning from it than you could from a book. So I started just a little online business and ran that for a year and just tried to learn everything I could about it while I was going through that process.
Wow, incredible. So basically, you're the girl that traveled all over, for 3+ years. Then I think that's when I first met you, I felt that there was a natural maturity to you, and maybe that's where that's from, that life experience.
Well, thank you. I mean, I definitely lived a pretty sheltered life until I started traveling, and once I did, I realized, there's a lot you sort of have to figure out on your own when you're so far away from home and by yourself.
I mean, I'm really just shocked right now that you're by yourself, traveling for 3+ years, finding hotels that were reasonable, finding apartments. But at what point, I guess what I'm curious about, when you were in a specific city and you're like, when will I go to the next place I decide to go to? Did you plan this out, or like, you know what, I feel like moving to a different city today, I think I'll move?
Some of it was planned out, some of it was spontaneous. I remember I was staying on this little island, tiny island off the coast of Malaysia for months, just because it was paradise. And then one day, a girl I'd met there who had been staying there a while too said, "Hey, I'm going to Indonesia tomorrow, do you want to come?" And I go, "Oh, I don't know, what are you gonna do?" And she's like, "Well, there's this little town with the best scuba diving, I've heard that's, in the whole world." And I was like, "Well, that sounds pretty cool." And so I was like, "Well, send me your flight information." And I booked it, went along with her to Indonesia the day after. So that was probably the most spontaneous I'd gotten. But sometimes I planned it out. Sometimes I read a book about a place and I wanted to go there, or I heard good things, or just decided that something was along the way and was worth checking out.
That's fascinating. So basically, you saved enough money to give yourself this freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So when you started a little online business, but did you ever feel like you were running out of money and that you needed to get home?
No, I kept expecting to, and I guess that's sort of what the first couple years was. Is I kept an eye on my budget, an eye on my bank account, and kept sort of expecting to start running low on money. But I found that I never really got to that point, which was great, because afterwards, of course, I wanted to start my own business, and it's nice to have a bit of a cushion to do that as well. So moved to San Diego and was able to start my own business and have that cushion to be able to start it all up. And I was really surprised. I think people expect that travel is more expensive than it is because vacation's expensive.
Right.
I heard a quote in a movie once that someone wanted to make $1 million so that they could buy a motorbike and drive it all over China. And I kept thinking, I was like, that's so ridiculous. You don't need $1 million to do that. You need a couple $1,000s to do that. I mean, you could do that for $5,000 or $10,000. You don't need $1 million to do that.
You need to write a book about traveling on a budget, because obviously you've done it and you're proof of it.
Right.
That's incredible. I hope you took a lot of images when you were there.
A lot of pictures.
That would have been, that's amazing. Well, I like to segue over to what you do now, because PR is an industry that a lot of millennials have an interest in. And they feel like, oh, you need to have all these press contacts and all this experience to be able to do that. And here you had a great job at Abercrombie, but then you went and traveled there 3+ years. So obviously a lot of contacts change over time.
Right.
Like, first off, how do you find the clients that you have? And number two, how do you continue to stay relevant for them?
Sure. I think that's the biggest challenge, is the PR industry is changing so rapidly with all the new technology and just the way that media is changing. I mean, traditional newspapers and TV stations are slowly fading out, closing one by one. There's a lot more online publications, and now there's this blurred line between what's social media, what's owned media, what's earned media, what's paid media. It's all coming together. And it doesn't stand in a silo anymore. It has to be integrated into SEO and digital marketing. So I think it's a great opportunity to be a millennial and get in the field, because it is changing so rapidly, and there's so much opportunity to bring knowledge of all these different areas of technology and the online world, and how you can communicate with people, which is just growing more and more varied every day. I mean, we're on Periscope right now.
That's right.
We have, you're doing an ebook, a Forbes article, video, and incorporating all of these different elements. So I think it's a great time to be a millennial in PR.
Yeah, and a lot of times people will say, well, you would have to work at a PR firm for a good 5-6 years before you can get into it. And obviously you're proof that that's not the case. Sure. So it's really interesting. Well, so let's talk about your saving habits today. So now you have your own business. You're taking care of things like rent and your business insurance and all these different costs. So do you keep a monthly spreadsheet of how much goes in and comes out?
I do. I use QuickBooks. It makes it really easy, especially when you have to keep track of the miles you're driving for business and all of these different things. So I use that. There's even an app on your phone, so you can sort of plug in things, and then you can look at monthly reports that show where your business income's coming from, how it's related to the months before. You can look at your costs in different areas, what's going out, and in all the different categories. Of course, in PR, meals and entertainment's a little higher percentage of mine than things like raw materials. So it's just interesting to look at and see how it changes month in and month out.
Very good. And so the money that comes in now, are you still saving about 10% for long term? You're still using your formula?
You know, I'm not using my formula anymore, just because it's so varied. So now I've just gotten to the point where I'm trying to save as much as possible.
Right.
I'm more looking at it from a yearly perspective instead of a monthly paycheck perspective.
Good.
So at the end of the year, obviously there's taxes to be paid, and that's when I look at, okay, how much money did I make, and then separate some of that off for long-term savings and short-term savings.
Good. Your mom would be so proud of you.
She is, yes.
Aww.
She's a big fan of how I've taken after her in saving.
I mean, I'm as a mom of 3, I'm just thinking, my child went and traveled for 3 years. First off, I'd be heartbroken, but I'd be worried, that
she was. She's definitely not as much of a traveler. She's more of a, suburban mom, and so.
Her grandma was. Maybe that's where.
So she saw a little bit of my grandmother and me, and. I checked in, I called her every week, and I sent her emails, and I told her everywhere that I was going. And I think if she was very worried, she hid it from me well. And because I'm sure she would have to be, but she was very supportive.
Wonderful. So what's the next chapter for you? What can we see from you going forward?
The next chapter, well, now I'm at the point in my life where I'm thinking about family. I'm thinking about what I want the next 20 years of my life to look like, and I'm in a beautiful city, no desire to leave and keep moving around. I found my home. So now it's about trying to think of what sort of work-life balance do I want to live, not just now, but once I have kids, what do I want that to look like? I think there's a lot more flexibility now with millennials than maybe my parents or my grandparents had. You don't have to be a stay-at-home mom or a career mom and choose. There's options for flexibility, and that's what I think, from talking to a lot of my friends, that's what they're looking for, is the flexibility to be able to do both, to be able to do everything.
Right, and not just work all the time. That's what we found. And beautiful things are coming from that. It's not just millennials are being lazy, but in many ways they really seek that life balance, right? Like you described. Right. And if you can have it all, why not have it all?
Exactly.
Right. And with that, thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us today. It's been so wonderful having you on. And do stay in touch, because I definitely want to see and continue to learn about how you grow. So if people want to stay in touch with you and follow your growth, how can they follow you best?
Sure. So Twitter or Facebook is obviously great. You can email me directly anytime at michelle@littlepenguinpr.com, or check out the website at littlepenguinpr.com.
Great. And we will definitely do so. And you can follow me at Twitter, SunGroupWP, and that's our website address as well, SunGroupWP. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.